Very well, and you're addressing an important point. In fact, cancer patients are at very high risk of developing malnutrition, and this is highly relevant for these patients because it impairs their quality of life and their tolerance to anti-cancer treatment, and also to clinical outcome and overall survival. But this is not very well known or accepted within the oncology community. Yes, in fact, I think this is a very important question because nutrition may be too small, thinking about what is usually associated with it, because in cancer patients there are three different major problems. One is they don't take in enough food because they are anorectic. They don't move like usual persons because they are fatigued, and also they have metabolic derangements which produce catabolism in these patients and breakdown of body proteins and muscle. Well, I think just from the experience we have, we think it is very important to have standard operating procedures and defined responsibilities at every cancer institution in Europe, and then set up these standards, like looking at change in body weight, like looking at body mass index, and do this in a kind of a screening type to really catch every cancer patient entering this institution, either as an outpatient or as an inpatient. Well, basically these guidelines, they were an update of an earlier guideline, but they were addressed to, get the information through to the Oncology Society and all the evidence that is out there and that is available, to put it into a high quality manuscript and present this to the society, to the community, and then of course our next step will be to implement what we have recommended in these guidelines. Well, just to repeat, to be aware that malnutrition is very important, it is frequent, it is relevant for the outcome, and you need to screen for malnutrition in all patients, and then direct a multi-dimensional treatment program which is individualized to the individual patient's deficits, and this should be done in a standardized way. Well, to be honest, we suggest a standardized stepwise procedure which should also be followed for cancer patients. So start with counseling patients, enriching food, offering nutritional supplements, but if this is not sufficient, especially if you have deficits in the GI tract induced by chemotherapy or by the cancer, peritoneal carcinosis, it should be clear that the oral route is not sufficient to supply energy and nutrients, and then of course supplemental and, if necessary, complete parenteral nutrition should be the way to supply these ingredients. Well, the medical community is based on distributing money, of course, and doing good nutritional care requires persons doing this and requires time. And we are talking about a little bit of redirecting resources in the medical system. And I think to start with this is to implement quality indicators. How well is an institution really following up malnutrition in each center? And just to be aware what is lacking in each institute, and then follow up with treatment. So I think that's the most important thing, to produce awareness at each center what they are lacking at this moment. Well, I think the most important point is not to lose any cancer patient that might have a malnutrition problem. So we recommend to do a nutrition screening for every cancer patient entering as either outpatient or inpatient at any European institution dealing with clinical cancer care. So do a screening for all patients, and if you find an at-risk situation, do a more detailed assessment of nutritional status, of metabolic status, and of physical activity. Well, in fact, the European Society of Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism is doing a guideline program for more than 10 years, and in fact the last version was more than 5 years ago, so there was some need to do an update, and an important point was to improve the methodological quality of our guideline, and of course there has been development in doing quality of these things, and we try to really reach the top level and do a very sophisticated methodological approach, and then present all the data we find in the international literature, and well, draw recommendations for every institution out of these data. Well, maybe let me ask back, what do you mean by malnutrition? So it's a definition. We are looking, and there are some world or global initiatives to define malnutrition, what is meant by this word. There is cachexia, there is undernutrition, there is sarcopenia, a lot of words that are not really known to the normal oncologist, but I think we are looking at three things: the inadequate intake of energy and nutrients in cancer patients, the inadequate physical activity, fatigue of these patients, and we are looking at metabolic derangement, systemic inflammation, insulin resistance, things that promote catabolism in these patients and that needed to be addressed. Yes, nutritional status should really incorporate also the metabolic environment of a cancer patient. It's not only what you eat from the plate, but what is happening in your body and whether there is catabolism or anabolism going on. And we know that physical activity in concert with food intake really influences what's happening in the body and whether you're building up protein or whether you are losing muscle mass. So I think what we recommend is to supply every cancer patient with the required amount of energy and nutrients. And if this is not possible by the oral or by the enteral route, then the parenteral supplementation would be the correct way and should not be avoided in these cancer patients. Well, basically I think it's very difficult to really exclude any entities, so we suggest to do a screening, and if you see malnutrition, go on with an assessment, find out what is the problem, what is a treatable problem, and then treat these patients. And of course there are some cancer types that have malnutrition much more frequently, like upper GI cancers or head and neck cancers and pancreatic cancer, so there are some types that really almost make malnutrition unavoidable. Well, definitely. Parenteral nutrition is an important part in the spectrum of supplying nutrients and energy to the cancer patient, starting from counseling and going to the other extreme of supplying parenteral nutrition, if this cannot be done by any other way.